Here it is. And I said it earlier. The bottom line in youth ministry is not how many kids do you have coming, but where will they be 5 to 10 years from now? That is exactly the opposite of what we think about a lot of times. We think about this day's program, this week's program, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about what do we do with the students we have and where are they going to be 5 to 10 years from now, and then again, where are they going to be in many ways 25 years from now? I think the strongest determining factor in watching students continue to walk with Jesus is that they are involved in ministry. They are not just people who are sitting back and watching, but they are absolutely involved. The question you have to ask is, do you want to graduate students who are good youth group attenders, or do you want to graduate ministers? And you know what? I think we have to look at this as saying we want to graduate students who are in ministry, who are ministers. Doug said this so well at the beginning of his session earlier, where he said, these are not people who are going to be ministers one day. These are not people who are leaders in the church one day. These are leaders in the church now, and we are the ones to affirm them doing that. To begin with, we have to look at the priority of ministry and leadership as we look at moving kids from attenders to really ministers onto ministry leaders. I love this story, and it's a story of James Garfield, who was President of the United States, but before he was the President of the United States, he was the President of Hiram College, which is someplace back east, probably near Mount Vernon, Ohio. And while he was President of the university, a father and a son came, and they said, we're going to these different universities, and we're kind of finding out what the curriculum is all about, because we're checking out different schools. He said, what's your particular curriculum? And so he laid out this really pretty comprehensive plan, and it was a comprehensive plan that Hiram College apparently was quite studious and quite energetic and quite industrious with the type of program. So he laid it all out. The father said, we've been to several colleges, and this seems to be the hardest. We could go to some other colleges, and it seems like he could get out of college and graduate with a much easier curriculum. And President Garfield at the time looked back, and he looked out a window, and outside the window there was a big oak tree. And he said, I'm reminded that it took God 100 years to build that oak tree. And he said, and it takes God 3 months to grow squash. He said, the question for you as your young man wants to go through college is, do you want to turn him into an oak tree, or do you want to turn him into squash? Well, it's not really that different when it comes to youth ministry. What we're trying to build is oak trees, and we're not going to do it overnight. We have instant results, instant everything. But you know what? When it comes to helping kids grow spiritually, when it helps them move from being an attender to a minister to then, in many ways, ministry leaders, it's not going to happen overnight. It shouldn't happen overnight. In fact, if it happens overnight, it probably isn't real. So, again, what we've got to be looking at is when a student graduates from your youth group, will he or she learn, what will he or she learn, I should say? What skills will they receive? And will they be graduating as oak trees, or will they be graduating as spiritual squash? You know what? Here's my whine, just for a minute. My whine is that a lot of people in youth ministry grow spiritually retarded kids. And I don't mean that in the sense of retarded as a bad word or any of that. I just mean their growth is spiritually retarded. And their growth is spiritually retarded because we haven't nurtured them enough. We've thrown out Bible verses and we've done instant little things thinking that they were going to grow on their own. But this, again, takes some work. Now, there are some misconceptions when it comes to youth ministry, and I want to name some of these misconceptions that are in your notebook as we go through it. First misconception is that youth ministries should be entertainment centers. I grew up in a generation where in youth ministry it was entertainment centers, and it was about entertainment. And, it was cool, and it was great. But you know what? We're competing with incredible entertainment, and we aren't entertainment. We live in a society where entertainment is king, and we live in a society where entertainment is queen, and it is not difficult in youth ministry to believe that that's what we should be doing, but it's just wrong. We don't have to entertain kids. Now, let's face it, Doug and I have grown up doing ministry in the shadows of Disneyland, and we can't compete with Disneyland. We just can't compete with Disneyland. Disneyland is amazing. They can spend millions of dollars on changing flowers at this point. Whatever it is. Kids love Disneyland. We can't compete. But we in the church can offer something that Disneyland can't do, and that's genuine relationships. As Doug was talking about the word relationship, we can offer genuine relationships. Disneyland can't do that. We offer the power of God. It's available to them. Disneyland can't do that. And, frankly, we offer adults who are crazy about teenagers. And Disneyland doesn't do that. It's a business. And so there's entertainment that's always going to be better, but those are some factors that will help us understand that we don't have to always entertain. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to brainstorm with me from, not in your small groups yet, but I am going to put you in groups in a minute. But I want you to brainstorm for me what we can compete with and what we can't compete with. What can't we compete with in youth ministry that's just incredible entertaining that we'll just never be able to compete with? Media. Media is so expensive and it is so good. We can use media, but we can't compete necessarily with media. We're not going to be able to compete with, American Idol. We just won't be as good, or Teen Idol, or American Idol, what it's called. Yeah. What else? School sports. Okay, good. We can't compete with school sports. What else? What is it? Electronic games. Good. What can we actually compete and actually win with? What else do we have besides the things I mentioned?
We can provide them the truth versus just lies.
Truth instead of just lies. Sincerity, being genuine. What else? Relationships, role models. Time. Love. What is it? Safety. Exactly. Well, the questions we got to ask. 2, are we developing spectators or participants? Are we developing spectators or are we developing participants? Am I entertaining a student or am I equipping a student? Really, that's going to help you great when you think through this particular topic. Am I entertaining them or am I actually equipping them? Now, obviously, we want to be people who are developing participators in ministry. And to do this, and I think it's the best illustration I can give you, is Edgar Dale, who was at Ohio State University near Mount Vernon, Ohio. He put together something called Dale's Cone of Experiential Learning. And again, people who are in education know this, but this in ministry, we sometimes miss this, and it is so critical. Dale's Cone of Experiential Learning. At the top of the cone, if you would, if you're kind of building a pyramid, if you're going to build a pyramid like this, at the top of the cone is the first one, well, they all go. The first one says verbal or written. Now, on the side of that, when you write verbal or written, write 5 to 10% retention. That means that you will remember 5 to 10% of what we say to you or what you read. Now, that's obviously pretty exciting for people like Doug and I, who spend most of our time either writing or speaking, and you're going to only remember 5 or 10%. Okay? Then, media is 25% retention. So really, when we're talking about entertainment, wow, that's what we're also talking about is how do we get kids to be participators, not just sitting there being spectators. And media is an entertainment form, but media is moving toward being experiential, and it's 25% retention. Role play is 40 to 60% retention, and experience is 80 to 90% retention. Let's go back to verbal and written. Give you the illustration. Sermons. How many of you remember what your pastor spoke on 6 weeks ago? Okay, one person? Well, you know what? Most of us don't even remember what our pastor spoke on. Some of us even did the sermon and we don't remember what it was. Okay? But it's only 5 to 10% retention. That's not bad. That doesn't mean we don't proclaim the word. That doesn't mean we don't do sermons. That doesn't mean the Holy Spirit isn't involved. It just means that we're only going to retain 5 to 10%. Now we go to media. Media, like I said, is 25%. Let's take a movie. Give me a movie that most of us would have seen at least a year ago. Okay? So give me a movie that probably most of us would have seen a year ago. Passion of the Christ, we also know, I mean, that's a great movie, obviously, but let's don't do that one. What is it? Spider-Man. Okay, how many saw Spider-Man 1 or 2? Okay, most of you, great. Okay, give me a scene out of Spider-Man. Okay, the train wreck. Kind of tell me the train wreck. What's the visual that you see in the train wreck when you kind of see it right now in your mind? You can see it clearly. How many of you can also see that clearly? All of you who went and saw that, okay? It's funny, when you said that, I was thinking of a movie that I had seen so many years ago called The Titanic, where the guy's up on the front of the boat. How many of you saw The Titanic and you remember that particular scene? That wasn't just 1 year ago, see? Give me another scene out of a Spider-Man movie. Oh, actually, you just put your hand up. Never mind. You were itching. Give me another one. The upside down kissing scene. How many of you remember? She's all excited over there, okay? Newlywed. How many have... Actually, over 16 but never been kissed. Okay. How many of you can see that scene in your mind? Okay, you know what's fascinating is, like I said, if I ask you what your pastor talked on just 4 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago, you may not know, but you remember that scene because you visualize it. When we see media, it takes a picture. That's why if we're trying to communicate to kids, one of the important things would be that you're moving them into participating because their mind is taking a picture. One of the negative scenes, which we're not talking about here, is the world of pornography. That's one of the big concerns. Greatest users of internet pornography would be boys ages 12 to 17, and those boys today are pushing a button. They're looking at some scenes that will not go out of their mind. Now, I'm one who has not seen pornography, but I'll tell you, when I was in 8th grade, I saw a National Geographic picture of this lady who was topless in National Geographic. I still have the picture in my mind. Okay. Well, if that's the case, how powerful media is, and yet it's only 25% retention. Okay. Now we move to role play. Okay. We do role plays. And if we were going to do some type of a role play where you actually take a scripture and you act out the role play, the one that most of us have probably done is the Good Samaritan role play. So there's one of my curriculum books in prayer, there's one on the story of the Good Samaritan. Okay, there's another role play. I love to use role plays. And the reason I like to is because it's going to be 40 to 60% retention. That's not just for the people who are watching it, but it's also for the people who are doing it. It's even stronger, again, because it's moving toward experiential. But experiential is 80 to 90% retention. So you can talk about going on a mission trip to Mexico from here, or to the inner city here in Los Angeles, or wherever it may be, and I can come into your youth group and I can move them with stories of, kids who are, in big trouble or whatever it is, and I can move them. But it's not until they go when their lives are changed. My daughter Heidi did what most of the kids in your youth group did. She went on a youth group mission trip. She built a house and all this. This is a kid who doesn't make her bed, and yet I see pictures of her, building this house on this mission trip. And you know what? It changed her. And it changed her because she experienced it. She has heard Dad talk about this kind of stuff forever and ever, but until she went, it was experiential education. Now, I actually want to show you a way to participate in a Bible study. So what I need from you to do is I need you to stand up, but I need you to get some change out of your pocket. And if you don't have change, then borrow change from somebody around. You might lose this change, so don't use major quarters or dollars or things like that. Pennies are fine or whatever, but pull some change out of your pocket, okay? Who needs change? Who still needs change? Okay, Danny back there. Somebody hand Danny some money. This guy right here, he needs change. Good. Okay, who else needs change? This whole table is poor. The woman from Boston is passing this out. Who else needs change? Everybody. Okay, now actually this is going to be a part of what I'm going to call a Bible study, so everybody needs to stand. These guys are still looking for their money. This guy's a Baptist, and he's pulling out his offering plate. That's nice. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to mingle, and I want you to give away as much money as you possibly can. Just give away as much money as you possibly can. Just go ahead, start. Okay, stop. These people over here are fighting. Now, what I want you to do is get as much money as you possibly can. Get as much money as you possibly can. Okay. Go ahead and sit down. Now, we just had a Bible study. What happened, I wish I would have been able to video this and then show you on this, because what happened was, as soon as I said, give as much money, you're messing around, you're giving, there's people over here. These people were, I don't know what you guys were doing, but you were fighting. She was kissing upside down. Something was going on. Money was going under the table, so people were kind of moving under there. But even the noise level was high. Then I said, stop, get as much money. At first, you were kind of like awkward about it, and people made some noise, but basically people didn't move. This table over here kind of sat down. And people kept waiting. I mean, it wasn't very long. If I would have waited much longer, some of you would have been very uncomfortable because you're kind of like going, what is he doing? But people weren't really moving after a while. There was still some talk. There were some people saying, talking about what they're going to do tonight and things like that, but they'd kind of like, it slowed down. Well, the Bible says it's more blessed to give than to receive. And if you were going to do a Bible study on that particular topic, it's more blessed to give than to receive, probably more effective than doing 3 points in a poem would be to play what this is called a giving game. It's an experiential game, if you would, that has a biblical point. You'd play the giving game, and then you'd give those 3 points. You can still give the 3 points. I'm just saying that you want to get kids active. You want to get them experiential, because this is the thing that they're going to remember. Now, with kids, you'd actually do this longer. I've done this with students before where people are throwing money, and they're doing kind of what this crowd was doing. And then you take a break, and then you just let it go really long, maybe like 3 minutes. And after a while, people are like, what's going on? Everybody is sitting down. Okay? We tried it in our worship service once with adults, and it didn't work, but I don't know why. It was right at the offering. But again, my point being is that you can do that with going to a mission experience. You can do that just by the way you teach. Okay? So this is a key to what we're talking about. And again, a major misconception is that youth ministries should be entertainment centers. No, they shouldn't. They should be experiential centers. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to create people who are equipped to do the work of the kingdom, not just people who are entertained. And that's really a big, 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 big difference. Another misconception is that, and this is an interesting one coming from the Saddleback guy and from somebody who's also been only in large youth ministries, is bigger youth ministries are better youth ministries. That is not right. That is false. Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Huge misconception. We're not talking about bigger is better. We're just talking about healthier. And you can have a healthy youth ministry if it's 12 people in the group, which, by the way, is the average size youth ministry in America. So a lot of times we play the comparison game to Saddleback. We always lose. But the average size youth ministry is 12. The average size United Methodist youth ministry is 6. Okay? So some of you have much larger groups than you thought you had, or you have an average group where you thought you had a small group. See? But you know what? It's not about big. Big can be unhealthy. Big can be impersonal. It doesn't have to be. But bigger is not better. Healthier is better. Better is better. I know of many large ministries, frankly, because I have the privilege to be involved with some, that are really unhealthy. The students can easily hide, or they can't hide in a smaller group. They're not personally challenged to be inoculated with Jesus because they don't even know people in it. There aren't relationships being built. Large youth ministries often mean for you more administration. Some of you are saying, what I could do if I could only go to the Mecca, if I could only have this larger group. And you know what you become then? An administrator, if you're not careful. I'm not saying that's right or wrong because some of you have the gift of administration. You'd love that. But again, as youth ministry gets larger, there's some stuff that goes along with it that's negative. Now, the primary goal of large youth ministries, and we have a bunch represented here, should actually be to think small. We'll talk more about that later, but it should be to think small. The only people who like large crowds are preachers. Because kids don't care. I mean, they want to have fun. They want to be noticed. But I think one of the worst things you can do, and I have been guilty of this so many times, and it's all about my ego then, is my Bible study is looking a little smaller. So I'd say, hey, so where is everybody tonight? And these kids are kind of going, wait, we're here. See? But we do that because we want a sign of showing success. It was what Doug said when he says, how's your youth group? 5, 15, 20. What does that have to do with anything? Frankly, it has to be about health, and it has to be about moving them from really being people who just attend on, and I think the whole church should hear this kind of stuff, okay? So again, only people like large crowds are preachers. So think small. Misconception, number 3, adult leadership should own, and I'm going to put all the major responsibilities. Adult leadership does not have to own all the responsibilities. With only adults in charge, the ministry may run more smoothly, but it may effectively produce what? Spectators. Students who listen to another student who might even be a C speaker are going to be influenced more greatly than somebody who is an A speaker who's an adult. Why? Because of peer influence. So adults shouldn't be doing all the only stuff in many, many ways. Students really need a job. Are you thinking you take students on a mission trip, okay, and one student may be able to do the crafts. One student may actually be able to give their testimony. But everybody should have a job. It may just be the kid who says, look, you're in charge of the van keys. And because this kid can't do crafts, this kid can't speak, but you're in charge of the van keys. And if you lose those keys, then we're going to be in Mexico for a long time, and we're going to be in prison, and we're never going to come back. But you know what? You're saying that, kid? You know what? I really honor you because you got a major job here. You're in charge of the keys. So somebody, if they do photography, then they're the photographer. Okay? In many, many ways, we're talking about these misconceptions where we say, well, it'll be better done if adults do it. It won't be more effective. Fourth misconception is teenagers are not ready for service in the church. That's what Doug was saying. You often hear that empowering phrase, oh, students are the church of tomorrow. Well, students aren't the church of tomorrow. And that's your job. Students aren't going to wake up and say, you know what, we're involved in the church. I don't have a whole lot of expertise in some things, but I do know revival and renewal. And I know that revival and renewal starts when young people pray and when young people make a radical commitment to Jesus Christ. And you are the facilitators of that. But the misconception is that, they're not ready. They are ready. What was the first age of the disciples? Some people are saying around age 16. You start looking at renewal and revival. Even people like Martin Luther and some of these people, these were not old guys. These were young people. When you're looking at what's happening in Latin America and different places around the world today, South Africa, Eastern Europe, some of the places where I, through Homeward, get to go, the leaders are young. The leaders are very, very young. Well, what we have to do is find out this generation has to be a generation that realizes that they can do leadership. So what we have to do is say, because we pull into this misconception as well, we have to be able to say, no, you are today's leaders. Okay. I love what a famous person said in the book, The Youth Builder. Our job is to equip and empower our students for ministry. The only way to do that is to give them responsibilities that matter and to empower them to carry out those tasks. Misconception number 5, for something to be done right, I need to do it. That would be you saying that. Now, we oftentimes don't say that, but we sometimes live that. One of the biggest roadblocks, I think, again, and it's kind of going along with the same thing, in developing student ministers and leaders is that we put adults in charge. We stay in charge. If we're honest with ourselves, we still have areas that we can turn over to students. I don't know what you can, but in your youth group. 3 questions in your notebook. Look at those 3 questions. What are students currently doing within the ministry? What am I currently doing that could be done by a student? And what absolutely needs to be done by me as an adult leader? Very few of those, frankly, are things that need to be done by you. And you start naming them. Teaching, you can have students teach. Putting together flyers and things like that, you can have kids do that. Small group leadership, you can have kids do that. A lot of really good ministries today have an adult leader and a student leader doing some combined things, but really the adult leader's job is to kind of move in the back and let the student leaders do it. Will it be as easy? No, it won't necessarily. But when you begin to look at renewal and revival, it's when somebody pushed a younger person up there and allowed this younger person to take off. Well, why do you look at the misconceptions? Well, for one thing, they wake us up. When I think through these misconceptions and when I have taught through these misconceptions, I think, I have done this. I am guilty. They also get us talking, get us kind of thinking, and they force us to pass these ideas on to others. So if those are the misconceptions that obviously what we need to do is, what's the positive side? Well, we need to get kids involved in the church. This is what I call the credibility factor. Write down the word credibility factor. And credibility factor means that all of us in youth ministry must develop a peer ministry program. It's not an option for good youth ministry. A peer ministry program doesn't have to look the same, and it doesn't have to look like Saddleback's, and it doesn't have to look like my church, and it doesn't have to look like your church, but somehow we have to have kids involved in a peer ministry program. Doug alluded to this. There's negative peer pressure, but there's also positive peer influence, and that's really where this credibility factor comes into place. And again, our goal is not to develop an empire around us. And you know, I used to look at youth ministry, and I've looked at the history of youth ministry, and it used to be centered around the dynamic person who could sing and lead music and do all this, and kids would, you know, flock to them and all that. And we used to always put that down, but then we'd say, it doesn't happen now. No, we still have that mentality. We still play the comparison game. We do. We can play the comparison game with somebody who's kind of building an empire. But what I find is that when that person leaves the church, usually that youth ministry crumbles. Okay? Because it's not about us. It's about building peer ministers. And so again, you got to get them moving. Well, there's some truths to this. Truth number one is students are already ministers. They don't know it. You've got to tell them. There are very few kids in your youth group who would say, oh, I'm a minister. No. You know, my daughter Heidi, it's almost 3 o'clock. And my daughter Heidi at 3 o'clock will be at a junior high school. And what she'll do is she works with Young Life. She's a 17-year-old, so she works with what they call Wildlife, which is the junior high side. So she'll be at this junior high, and she'll be with kids, and she calls it contact work, or they call it contact work. And she will have candy wrappers, and on the candy wrappers, their meeting is tonight. Heidi's part of the leadership. And their meeting is tonight, and it says, you know, Wildlife is at, you know, 7:19, and it's at this house and all that. And they hand out the candy to these kids right after school, and they talk to some of the kids, and the Wildlife kids come over and give them hugs and, you know, do the whole thing. You've done it. It's what you do. But you know what? Heidi's doing that, and she's 17. And until the other day, when I said, God, you're really doing ministry. She goes, no, I'm just passing out candy. I'm just getting these kids coming. Then we have to clean up the wrappers afterwards because the kids eat the candy, drop the wrappers on the ground. It makes the, you know, administration mad. So, you know, they're going around cleaning up. I said, no, you are a minister. You're doing youth ministry. That's exactly what Dad used to do. It's a good idea. I never really did the candy stuff. But, you know, I was on campus. And she had this kind of like aha moment. So what I needed to do, just even with my own daughter, but we need to do this with our students, is, no, you are a student. You know, the first book, Doug and I wrote a book together when Doug was in diapers and he didn't have any eyebrows. And no, honestly, I mean, I don't know how old you were, but you were probably like 19. And we wrote a little booklet called Congratulations, You're Gifted. I'm sure it's changed all of your life. And actually, Doug had been working in a church. He was working at our church, but in the summers, I'd kind of send him someplace else. And he was working in this church. He created something on spiritual gifts. We now have a curriculum on spiritual gifts, which was pretty much that same stuff. But what was fascinating about it was as we started teaching kids this whole idea of spiritual gifts, we began to understand that was a part of our job. And frankly, I hope you feel an urgency, junior high, high school, to help kids begin to understand their spiritual gifts, identify their spiritual gifts, and then use their spiritual gifts. All Christians are ministers. The mistake that we've made with kids is that we are making them feel like to be a minister, you have to have a seminary education or you have to be over 21. No, that's exactly wrong. In fact, if we do that, they're not going to stay in the church. One of the biggest stains in youth ministry right now is what? That about 80% of the kids who graduate from high school this year will not be in church next September. That's a stain. That's terrible. It's embarrassing. And I'm convinced that one of the ways to alleviate that is to move these kids from being spectators. They were spectators. They found something better. Okay? So what it is when they're in ministry, then they have nothing else, nowhere else to go, see. I think it'll change it. I really do. The joy of youth ministry is watching students move from spectator to developing and really experiencing a lifestyle of ministry and a lifestyle of servanthood. And you know what your job is? Your job is to confirm them. You know, I have a curriculum over there called Confirming Your Faith. And what it is it's a rites of passage Bible study. And the reason I did this was because I wanted kids to know that when they started moving into, you know, teenage years and older teenage years, that we were going to confirm their faith. We were going to confirm their ministry. We were going to recognize the fact that they were ministers. And it moves from kind of understanding theology and all that kind of junk to, not junk, theology and junk, to more in terms of things like making commitments on, you know, daily devotions, things like that. But you know what it ends with is confirming their mission, their ministry, that they're servants, that they have a role in the kingdom. And if you've got kids who are graduating from high school who do not understand that they have a role in the kingdom to be ministers, then you know what? You haven't done your job. You just haven't. I had students who would graduate from some of my youth ministry things, and they would say, Guy, you know, this was so fun, and we never could make it into the church after that because, you know, your youth group was so neat, and, you know, I really liked the way you spoke, or I liked the way Doug spoke, or I liked this, and the music was so great, and we go into church and it's boring. You know whose fault that was? It wasn't the big church. It was our fault. Because we hadn't integrated them into the life of the church, into the body of Christ, and we hadn't said, you know what, there are times when, as a minister, it's not fun. But our job is to move them. And literally, it's building an oak tree. It's not building a squash. And by building an oak tree, it's going to take 100 years. But that's where we've got to go. Students have to know that they're already ministers, and your job is to confirm them. Many times in my life, and it was later in my youth ministry years, I didn't get it at the beginning, but I would just say to somebody, "God, have you ever considered going into youth ministry? Have you ever considered going into mission? Have you ever considered becoming a full-time ministry person somewhere, somehow?" And they would kind of go, "Whoa." And by recognizing that, I even help them consider a call to ministry. But I can't do it just for those people. I have to help everybody understand that they're ministers. I was in Kauai, tough ministry job. And I was in Kauai, and I was actually speaking in high schools, public high schools, which is interesting. They only have 3 there in Kauai. And my friend Rick Bunchu was a pastor there of Kauai Christian Fellowship. And there was a season in his life where, as a youth pastor, his congregation at that time, because he did wild and crazy things, always said, "Can't bring food into the to the deal. If you spill something, that's not a good thing. You can't use this certain refrigerator in the kitchen," and all these kind of things. One time he had broken into the refrigerator and broke the lock because they actually had a lock on because they were having some big pancake breakfast, and he basically got almost fired for it. So as he was thinking about that, and as a pastor, he was building a new church. They'd built this new church, and he was thinking about the carpets and all that. And he went, "You know what I'm going to do?" He made keys for everybody. So if you go to that church, you have a key. You don't have to be a member. You don't have to go through a class. They're just keys. You can always pick up the keys. And there's only one room. It's the money room and they don't do it for the congregation, but they do it for people from the outside who might be able to get a key. They all have keys. Rick has a key. They have a key to Rick's office. They have a key to the sanctuary. They have a key. They have a skateboard park thing. They have keys for that, but they also have a thing that you can't skateboard unless there's an adult there, but kids can do all the opening. Kids have keys, see? Well, in many ways, we need to make sure that our kids have, figuratively speaking, keys to understanding that they are in ministry and that they are a part of the life of the church. Another truth, youth workers are in the equipping business. You are an equipper. You are not an entertainer. And that should take that should take, in many ways, the pressure off of you. We're not in the entertainment business. There's only a few of us who could probably be in the entertainment business. I couldn't. But you know what? I can equip because I have a nurturing heart, and you have a nurturing heart. And so the fact is that that's good news for us, that we are in the equipping business, not the entertainment business. The best ministry happens when we give students ownership of the ministry. Let me say it again. The best ministry happens when we give kids ownership of the ministry. Who are the kids who are the strongest leaders in your group right now? They're kids who own your ministry. And the kids who don't own your ministry, they're questionable. Our calling is to equip and empower students for ministry to do the work of the ministry. That's our job. Okay? There's other parts of the job, but this is the critical one when we're thinking about empowering student leaders. Our job is to equip saints to do the work of the ministry, period. Okay? You can, if you'd like, read Ephesians 4:11 and 12. It's in your notebook, and that is pretty much summarizing it. One of the things that I appreciate about Doug is at Saddleback, he chose the word discover to communicate ministry. And the idea behind that is that students are already called to do ministry, so it's just a given. They come to that place, they're going to hear that all the time. But the joy is having them for 6 years. And having them for 6 years, they're going to discover a couple of things. One is spiritual gifts. I think that's a critical element. If you've not taught your kids how to discover and use spiritual gifts, then that has to be critical for you. Okay. Secondly, is a heart for what they love to do. By the time they graduate, they should kind of know what they love to do. They should actually know the different parts of the church and how they could serve in the church and what they can be doing in the church, doing now and doing later, and give them a vision for that. If they are kids who are really good at hanging out with the sound guy, they should be sitting in the back at your regular service in the sound booth working on sound, if that's what they really love to do. Evaluate their skills. They should have their skills evaluated not as adults, but evaluate their skills as students. Think about their feelings when they do certain ministries. And frankly, they should be receiving feedback, because there are times when we should say, you know what, both in a positive way and in a constructive way, this is either great, you're great, or maybe you need some help in this. But again, that's another truth. A very important truth is students have a lot to offer. Most students don't think they have anything to offer. Sometimes adults are the only ones who know this, because students don't just automatically say, I have a lot to offer. Part of equipping and empowering is to believe in your kids. I love the story of Jesus looking at Simon It says, your name's no longer going to be Simon. It's going to be Petros, the rock. Cephas in Aramaic, the rock. Basically, Jesus nicknamed Simon Rocky, and he became the rock. And even today, as we think about what's going on in our world, and we think about some of the things that are happening even within the Catholic Church, where they call Peter the rock of the church. Well, guess what? Jesus was actually, they're just taking it from the Scripture. Jesus said, and upon this rock, using a word play, I will build my church. At that time, Peter was much like a teenager. Peter was a mumbly-bumbly fisherman who didn't have it all together, who went up and down, and we see this. We get to know this man in the Scripture, and he becomes the leader of the Jerusalem church. He becomes the rock. Why? Because Jesus believed in him. That may be one of the most powerful things that you can do. He talked about encouragement earlier. He talked about belief in many ways. But you know what, people? Your kids need to know that you believe in them. And it's hard to do because they're not perfect, because sometimes they're not going to like you. Sometimes they're not going to be impressed with what you have to say or do. Sometimes they're going to sin like crazy because they're going through an experimental phase. Your job is to believe in them. It's one of the most important points. Students have a lot to offer. And they're all not going to be clones of you. Thinking of a girl named Kim who was in our youth group. And Kim was going through this spiritual gifts inventory thing that Doug and I had put together. And all of a sudden she realizes that she has the gift of hospitality. And she goes, now explain to me what the gift of hospitality is. I said, the way I'd explain it is it's you and your mom. Because we would have Bible studies at her mom's house, and it was always, the best food, the most welcome, Well, Kim was just like that. I said, you have the gift of hospitality. She said, I thought so. She said, no, I don't necessarily have the gift of teaching. I went, you're right. So use the gift of hospitality. She said, well, I make great peanut butter cookies. I go, you do. You make the best peanut butter cookies I've ever had. And I said, and you make me feel welcome, and you make others feel welcome. Practice that gift. You know what? I needed to, once again, I needed to just help her understand that she has a lot to offer. Students need to know that they are significant. And you know what? They're not going to hear that from their parents, unfortunately, sometimes. I'm the family-based youth ministry person, who loves to talk about this. Parents aren't going to do it as much. You've got to be able to do that. So they need to know that they're significant. They need to know God's desire is to use them. And if you don't tell them that, and if you don't show them that, nobody else is going to. They need to know that their fears are normal. My goodness, I was thinking back the other day because the first sermon I ever gave was at a church kind of right really around here. I'd become a Christian. I grew up in Anaheim, and it wasn't that far away, and I gave this sermon as a high school senior. I was scared to death. It was a terrible sermon. I was supposed to speak for like 30 minutes or 25 minutes or something, and I spoke for 11. Okay? And I sat down. And, it was not a good message at all. I was scared to death. Somebody should have come alongside of me and said, you know what? It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to at times have fear because it's normal. Well, we can say that with kids. Get them doing ministry, but then also let them know that fear is normal. Let them also know that they're not powerless. Sometimes at the thought of being too cool, we forget about the fact that the Holy Spirit dwells within us. And how incredible to get kids in touch with the power of God. Who says a junior higher can't be in touch with the power of God and at the same time have acne and put gum on the pastor's seat and all these other things? They can, and they will. And so it's important for us to understand that they are not powerless. And also they have something to offer the world. I don't know many students who absolutely understand that. That's our job. And what does it say? It's to believe in him. Who is the Simon Peter or the Simon Peterette in your world right now? Your job is to believe in them. Okay? This generation, probably more than any other generation, needs to hear that message. They're so gifted and they are so passionate. They just need a place to express their giftedness. And you know what? If they don't find that place in the church, they'll find it someplace else. So give them that opportunity. Now, in your notebook, and I have no idea what this means, but it looks really nice in the notebook. Thank you, Doug. There are 5 leadership styles to look for to your students. Thank you, Doug. Visionary student, managing student, the motivational student, the shepherding student, and the team building student. And in many ways, what we have to help kids, because they all play the comparison game and they always lose with the comparison game, is we have to help them understand that there are different styles of even leadership. I have 3 daughters. I have a visionary daughter, and she would use the visionary style of leadership, and my other 2 daughters always back to her and kind of back down because she has the visionary style. She's dynamic. She's out there. She has all these different things. But you know what? I've got another one that has a much more of a shepherding heart. And so she's going to go work at a camp this summer, and she's going to shepherd children. But she doesn't think that's as big of a deal as my daughter who's the big visionary. Okay? And then I actually have another one who's absolutely motivational. She's the one right now who's passing out little things to get. She will bring kids in junior high to this meeting tonight. This is this kid. She's so motivational. It's amazing to me. But you know what? She doesn't think her gift is. She goes, I really wouldn't want to work at a camp. And I really wouldn't want to work with this kind of kids that Becca's doing, or with Christy. She goes, I could never be Christy. But she has her own leadership, and so what I have to do is help them understand. It's called personally tailored discipleship. I call it PTD, personally tailored discipleship. I have to personally tailor, as a youth worker. Now I'm talking about my own daughters, and as a father, but in youth ministry, I have to personally tailor the discipleship to help them understand that they have a lot to offer. Truth 4: students need specific roles. This is a biggie. I don't know that sometimes we're specific enough with kids. It's not that helpful to simply tell a kid, hey, you've got to do something. They really honestly don't know what to do. So you got to guide them and then let them discover kind of what you might call that sweet spot on their own. When you're in a situation, sometimes you can do it. If you do it all for a kid, well, then they've never learned that. You've got to let them discover it. I love what it says in the notebook in terms of actions of a student minister. One is a student minister serves in small ways. 2, looks out for loners and visitors, understands the program's purposes, greets at meetings, speaks highly about the ministry. You know what? All kids can do that. That's not something spectacular in terms of the idea of somebody standing up and singing or whatever, but they can do that. And what we've got to do is help them understand that, what their purpose is. As I mentioned before, students need specific roles. The responsibilities that they have to be meaningful. The responsibilities that are gift appropriate. Their responsibilities have to be timely, and they have to be challenging. So in other words, what I'm saying is raise the bar. Challenge kids in a way that maybe you haven't challenged kids before. When you challenge a kid, most of the time, if they have some leadership ability, they will rise to it. They sure do in sports. They sure do in cheerleading. They sure do in drama. They sure do in music. So why, when it comes to youth ministry, do we just kind of not make any big deal out of them? Have expectations. If they blow the expectations, fantastic. There's a word called grace and mercy, or it's a learning experience for them. We learn more through failure than we do through winning anyway. So raise the bar. Believe in these kids. Challenge them. I love this generation of junior high and high school kids because they're into extreme everything. And so what's cool about it today is, like I was speaking a week and a half ago in Honolulu, and I talked on radical commitment, being radically committed to God. And I said, are you willing to go anywhere and do anything for God? And I said, if you are, I want you to stand up. Well, I'm amazed how many of these kids stood up. I would have stood up for peer pressure, but I wouldn't have really believed that when I was their age. But these were kids, I believed these kids. So are you willing to go anywhere and do anything? Yeah, I'll get dirty for God. I'll move. I'll do whatever. Man, that's phenomenal. So in many ways, what we have to do is literally challenge them. When they experience roles and ministry opportunities that are meaningful, will they begin to see that God is in fact working in their own life in significant ways. You know what? This is the kind of message, if you would, or seminar, that is kind of walking on holy ground. Because this has to be, Doug was talking about foundational things, and then we bring this in to simply say, you know what, this is where we've got to go with students. Because really, what's the bottom line? Where will they be 5 to 10 years from now? I got news for you. If you just play games and they turn into entertainment centers, you know what? They're not going to be there. They're going to find something more meaningful. Why do students move into gangs? You think they move into gangs because they want to be in gangs? No, they move into gangs because they want something meaningful in community, and they're tied into it. And because they want something meaningful in community, they kind of don't care if it's about Jesus or if it's about sniffing glue. So what an incredible opportunity for us to kind of raise the bar and have them be radically committed to God. Students need to be released to do work of the ministry, very similar to what I've said. Release students. Allow them to dream. I love the question that Doug asks. I think he asks in shape, where he says, if you could do anything for God and you knew that you wouldn't fail, what would you do? You know what, I have borrowed that so many times with students and actually, frankly, with some of you, where I've just said, if you could do anything, what would you do? Couldn't fail. That's a fabulous question to ask your students, because then what you're getting them to do is be in touch with their dreams and let them know that it's okay to dream and it's okay to dare to dream and it's okay to bring God into those dreams, because kids need to be released to do ministry. And part of your job is just kind of allowing them to go here and there. I'll tell you a story. There were a couple of girls, there were 4 girls who came to me and they said, we want to start working in a convalescent hospital. I said, well, we go to this convalescent hospital most Easters and most Christmas. They go, no, we want to go every Tuesday and we want to bring a bunch of people because this convalescent hospital said that they need people to come and visit. So I said, well, okay, but I thought, I'm not going to announce it in our group because these kids are just simply not going to come. They're not going to be interested in it. So I said, well, you guys can announce it. And so they get up, they announce it, and they bring like 12 kids. So I decided that I would go with them that first time. And so they go in, and these 12 students are awkward. They're walking in this convalescent hospital. They don't really know anybody. And all of a sudden, they meet this lady, and her name is Eva. And Eva is in a wheelchair. She's slumped over. She's about 87 years old. I think she's had a stroke. And she's kind of drooling. And she kind of looks up, and she'd been told that, we were coming. And she goes, well, praise the Lord, the church people are here. I'm kind of going, oh my gosh. She kind of announces it to everybody. And so we're going around meeting these people. And these girls kind of get tied around good old Eva. We find out that she's a Southern Baptist pastor's wife who I think was Miss Alabama in the year 1886. And she wanted to know if I knew her husband, who had been dead for 50 years, but that's another story. And so the girls were all excited, and so the next week, 4 show up, because everybody else left. I want to tell you, those 4 girls, for a year, went. And they would always ask me to go, and I always felt guilty, because I always found something else to do, because I didn't want to go. I have a love and a care for people who are hurting and people who are sick, and I really do. It's a part of my DNA. But you know what? I didn't want to go to this convalescent hospital. It smelled, and I had other things to do that were more important, like prepare messages and do all these other things. But these girls kept going. They went every time. It was just unbelievable. And so one time they said, we want our pastor to come. And I'm like, oh yeah, our pastor. This is Tim, by the way, Doug. He says, we want our pastor to come. And I'm going, yeah, he'll really go. So I said, well, go ask him, because I figured he'd somehow turn him down. He goes, I'll come, if Jim will come. So it's now Tim, our pastor. He's wearing a tennis outfit, and myself, and dressed, I don't know, whatever you'd be dressed like, and the 4 girls. These girls now know everybody in the whole place. So we walk in, and there is Eva, and she's always sitting there waiting for them on Tuesdays, because it came at a certain time, and she goes, praise the Lord, the church people have come, and they've brought the pastor. At this point, Tim goes, I can't believe that we're in here. What is this all about? He was one of these people who loved people and whatnot, but this was not his expertise. He was a good speaker, but walking into a convalescent hospital with 4 girls and a semi-crazy lady was not his idea of a thing, although she had eyebrows. And, and anyway, she comes over and she wants to talk to Tim, and she's talking to me, and she's holding our hand, and she's the lady who has lipstick around her lips, but she's kind of missed her lips, and so there's more lipstick, here, and she kind of smells, and she's talking away, and she's talking about her husband. She's going back through the Alabama thing and all this. I'd already heard this, but Tim's just, kind of listening to her, and all of a sudden she starts to pee. She's urinating, and it's going all of a sudden down right out the side on the chair, now spilling on the floor. It might have been a bag, because this lady either really had to go badly, or, it was like a lot of urine. And she's still talking. Tim and I are totally grossed out. It's getting on my shoes, because it's more closer to me. And Tim is looking at me, and he's moving away, and we're both now kind of away from this lady as she's talking. And she's not even aware of the fact that, pee is running down her leg and, doing what that. Those 4 girls went and got towels. They didn't ask for nurses. They didn't ask for psych tech, any kind of thing. They went and got nurses. They cleaned up the urine. They took her into her room, and they actually changed what was probably a diaper. I don't even know what happened. And Tim and I were grossed out. And I looked at that later, and I went, oh my gosh. 4 girls were willing to be Christ to this lady, and both the pastor types were absolutely, sickened by it. I went, man, I got something to learn from some girls who had an incredible heart. And it was only 4, and it wasn't a success, because in my mind, success would be a bunch of kids from our youth group. Most of the kids didn't even know that was ever happening there, see. Students have to be released to do the work of the ministry that they are called to. And too often, if we we'll bail them out. What do? Well, it's simple. And I love this from Purpose-Driven Youth Ministry. Take a need and turn it into a ministry. And this is the kind of dream that you give kids. Greetings, there's a greeting need. So you start a greeting ministry. There's an art need. You start an art ministry. There's a setup need. So you start an environment ministry. Change the title a little bit. Computer need. There's a geek ministry. No offense to to some of you. Nadeem, or who's ever back there. Andy. Actually, you hang around with a lot of geeks. You're a geek. What can I say? Had an experience when he was in high school where there wasn't a whole lot of kids coming to this deal. Now, this dates me like crazy, this illustration. But there was a guy who I'd kind of gotten to know because his sister was coming. And his sister's name was Sharon, his name was Tom, and he wouldn't come. He was involved in the choir, and frankly, Tom, and even Doug would admit, was kind of a geek. And, but he was really into like slideshows and things like that. And literally, we are not at video, we are not at, we're talking ancient. And so one day I was visiting with him. His parents were really leaders in the church, and I was visiting with him, and they kept bugging me to say, try to get Tom to come. And finally I said, Tom, I need a slideshow. And his eyes kind of lit up. Not even sure if Tom was a Christian. And so Tom, came to the slideshow and built a slideshow at what we called OP night. And now we had two geeks. We had Doug and Tom, and that was great. And they kind of, it was good for them. But what was interesting about Tom was through this slideshow, he was, the group was kind of cool, actually. And Tom wasn't cool. And he never really felt necessarily a part of it until some other kind of geeky kids came. But when he graduated, he came to this school right here. It was called Southern California College. And they had at that point, I don't know now, but I would imagine they still do, they had a great film department. And Tom went through film, and then he started doing, now he was a Christian filmmaking geek. And then he started doing films, or doing commercials for Mazda, Pepsi, and became a rich filmmaking Christian geek. And then Tom said, you know what? And he was making hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then all of a sudden he said, you know what? I want to go into ministry. So today he is the president now, just became president of a division of an organization that makes incredible documentaries. Most of you have seen his documentaries. You just didn't know he was in charge of it. And it started because he was doing slideshows. But you know what? There is a Tom in your youth group. And there is a Kara in your youth group. Kara is his wife, and she was, I know the day she became a Christian. It was at a Great Adventure retreat, winter retreat. And a man named Les Blank held her hand. I watched this, and he prayed with her. And she went and became a nurse. And then she married Tom, who were, in the youth group, and they had thought they would go around the world, and it ends up, she was a little bit almost frustrated because, she wanted to be a nurse, and she spoke perfect Spanish, and she thought they'd go around the world. I was with them in Poland one time. But you know what? God's using her in an incredible way right now, helping the poor and helping the oppressed. She volunteers in a clinic in Denver. You know what? They had a dream. They had a dream in high school. And what I'm saying is you can do the same thing. Now, these were kids. There were people in our group, leaders, adult leaders, who could have done the slideshow or the video or the, any kind of this stuff, more effective in some ways. But kids needed to be doing it. Now, here's what I want you to do. At your tables, I want you to come up with a list of 20 things that kids can do in your youth group. Okay? Just brainstorm for a minute, 20 things kids can do. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that. I'm going to give you 4 minutes to do it, right fast. Okay, let's go back. Let's kind of come back. I was watching many of you, and I was amazed at how many of you are writing. I was kind of listening in on a couple of conversations, and you know what? The fact is that I think you got that. I mean, there are lots of things that they can do. My suggestion is that you maybe even take some of the notes that you took down, you put it by your desk someplace at your office or in your home or wherever you happen to hang out when you're thinking about youth ministry, and you begin to say, you know, what are some of these things? What could some of my students do? And then begin that process of, in many ways, for some of you, and it's tough for us control freaks, but to begin to hand over, yeah, I see people smile, begin to hand over the work of the ministry to your students. Again, this doesn't mean that they don't need guidance. There was a season in youth ministry, and I've been in it long enough, where they used to say it should be student-led, and basically the adults just in the background. Students have a hard time distinguishing between wants and needs. What do we need in this youth group? We need to go to Disneyland. Well, it's a want, and actually that's a good want. But I wouldn't have the students do everything, because you need to be guidance. Where there is no guidance, the people fall. In the multitude of guidance, there's counsel, wise counsel. Okay? So again, you know, have them begin to do some of those things. Now, I want to move toward developing a student leadership team. You see, every kid should be in ministry, but every kid should not be a student leader. Let me say that again, because that may surprise you. Every kid should be in ministry, but every kid should not be a student leader. In fact, there are some kids who are really great kids. They shouldn't be student leaders because they're too busy, and that's not bad. You know, as a high school student, I was very involved in sports, and I was so involved that I really couldn't have been a strong student leader. I became a Christian in my junior year, and so I got involved in campus life. I really wasn't involved in the church all that much, but I couldn't have been the most major leader and still taken the amount of sports that I was involved in. I was involved in student body. I was trying to get good grades. I couldn't have done that. And so again, let me say it loud and clear. Everyone in your youth group can be a part of doing the work of the ministry, but not everyone should be a student leader. Now, I don't want to make anybody feel guilty, because I know some people choose their student leaders by vote or by attractiveness or by outgoing or talent, or, you know, we vote in the church, not with students, but with adults. Sometimes an elder is somebody who's rich or a good business person. It's not that they have a spiritual depth, okay? I don't think that's the way you do it. I don't think you should have a huge student leadership group, huge. Jesus tended to manage with just a little bit more of a few, okay? It was very clear that Jesus' philosophy, if you were going to be a leader, then what you do is you get to the back of the pack and be a servant. Take John 13, kind of 4 through, 17. Jesus takes off his clothes, has on a loincloth, so in other words, has on his underwear. Really, really odd story. In the day of that day that Jesus was in a loincloth and he begins to wash the disciples' feet as a slave, that was his method. And then he says when he's finished and he's had an argument with Peter and everybody else is kind of like stunned that their master and their Lord had done that, he said, I'm your master and I'm your Lord, so follow my example. And not only did he say follow my example, but he said you will be blessed when you follow my example. So that particular scripture basically says become a slave, a bond slave. We're looking for bond slaves. We're creating kids who are bond slaves. We have to be that way too. The call to Christ is the call to serve. When we're beginning to look at student leadership, the call to Christ is the call to serve. And we've got to teach them that in junior high and high school. And if we don't teach them that in junior high and high school, because everything else says what's in it for me, we're probably in trouble. I have a sign in my office, and it's a quote by Albert Schweitzer, incredible missionary. And he says, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know is that those who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. Phenomenal statement. And I look at that statement, and you know, sometimes there's just things up there. There's just things up there on the wall. Hey, thanks so much for I could read it. His eyes aren't as good, but you just had 10, right? Yeah, and then there'll be a 5-minute in just a minute. Yeah, 10. Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah, Doug can't, but everybody else can see that. Okay, no, that's the. Hey, Doug, it's the same one. Okay. Hey, Andy, thanks. You're my bro. I really appreciate it. You are the man, okay? So you did a great job. Thanks. I love you. And I've lost my place. What we've got to do is look at kids and say, and they don't have to be cute, fun, and popular. They don't have to be rich. They don't have to be all that talented, but they have to be servants. And you know what? That's how we go after student leaders. Are you willing to serve? The call to Christ is the call to serve. Are you willing to do that? And you know what? You may get some geeks out of that. Okay? Now, I love what Doug has in his first 2 years in youth ministry. Actually, I wrote this for him, and he put it in. When we think about tip number one is it's raise the bar spiritually, but look at the heart qualities of a student leader. The student leader is a servant, has a positive attitude, is a devoted follower of Jesus Christ, displays an authentic Christian lifestyle, not a perfect Christian lifestyle. Authentic is not perfect. Authentic is authentic, genuine, is humble, is friendly, and is approachable. Those are the types of heart qualities that you want from a kid. I believe it's what Doug calls no doubt lifestyle, a no doubt lifestyle in purpose-driven youth ministry. And there's a no doubt person who's a follower of Christ. Not perfect, but that's the deal. And really, in many ways, what we're looking at is as I mentioned earlier, raise the bar. When you're looking at student leaders, raise the bar, okay? Raise the bar. You know, one of the reasons you raise the bar is because in every other thing that a teenager is doing, the bar is raised. I happen to live in the world of cheerleading. My 3 daughters were cheerleaders. I mean, my goodness, it was a 24/7, 365 commitment. I mean, 27 hours of learning gymnastics and doing all this kind of stuff, spending like $3,000 for competition cheer and traveling around the country and all those kind of things. You know what, man, the parents are involved, they're involved. Well, we raise the bar. If you want to be active, you want to be good, you've got to raise the bar. I think we should do this with student leadership. I said to my student leadership team, if you miss 3 times, and I got it out of sports, if you miss 3 times, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean you're not a wonderful Christian, all that. You're not in student leadership for the next, for the season. We did it in 6-month seasons. Now, again, if they were sick or if their grandma died or something like that, I understand. But basically, why is it that in the church we don't hold them to some of the same responsibilities and some of the same, frankly, roles that they would have in football, in basketball, in drama, in music, in band? So I think you raise the bar. You raise the bar in terms of expectations. You raise the bar spiritually. Tip 2 is make interviews mandatory. Now this is voting stuff for me, and again, I'm sorry if I offend you on that, but make interviews mandatory. You interview them just like they would be interviewed for something else that they were doing, okay? And if they make the qualifications, because you've made them known, if they go through the qualifications, well, then they can become a part of that. But you interview them. Because when you interview them, you say, do you understand the high calling that this is? And all of a sudden, you've raised the bar spiritually because you've actually spent some time interviewing. You don't have to interview all of them, although I would suggest for you, because again, even if you're in a large group, these are kids that you really want to get to know. And so you put a little pressure on them in terms of asking them. And it's fun. An interview can be fun. But again, you're beginning to ask them these kind of questions. You're beginning to put something more like a job description in front of them. 3 is inform the parents regularly. Now, as some of you know, my passion is family-based youth ministry. And we're only kind of slipping this in as we talk about leadership. But in my opinion, you don't have a student leadership program if you're not going to inform the parents on what is expected and what they'll receive from it. Way too many of us are in youth ministry and we're not communicating with parents. Group Publishing did a study not that long ago that asked parents, what is the number one thing you'd like to say to your youth worker? You know what they said? We want more information. We don't have enough information. The youth worker is assuming that kids are coming to, the youth worker, we're assuming that the kids are saying, yeah, we studied this book or we studied that book. They're not saying that. And I'll say to my kids, and my kids are kind of spiritually, growing and whatnot, and I'll say, hey, so what did you study? We talked about God. Thank you, Andy, again. I really appreciate it. You're the man. I can see it. 5, easy. Yeah, thanks. Hey, with Doug, maybe you just get like twice the size of the thing or something tomorrow. But with kids, darn it, I lost my place. Andy, it's all your fault, you big punk. Why do you keep interrupting me? No, I'm kidding. No, back to the expectations. With my kids, I'll say, what did you guys study today? I don't know, God. I know, but what part of God? I don't know. I mean, we read the Bible. Okay? And so I don't know. You know what? Communicate with them. And communicate to the parents what's expected, because then the parents might say, you're saying, here's the deal. They can't miss but 3 times. And all of a sudden, the parents even understand the fact that this is a high calling. You've raised the bar spiritually, if you would. Let me say something about family-based youth ministry just very quickly. Family-based youth ministry is not a program, it is a mindset. And part of this mindset is that you're going to express to parents, whether the parents agree or not. There are times, if you had a program, even for the leadership students, and you brought parents, all the parents are not going to come. They're not going to be that motivated to come. That's okay. You're still going to communicate with them, because you're going to bring the parents into this fact. Because really, the best and most effective ways to keep kids in the church is when parents are involved. Now, I realize we're talking to To a number of you who would have parents who don't care and who aren't involved, so what? The fact of the matter is we're still going to communicate with parents because in God's economy, it's the family. And as studies are coming out, Richard Ross, Josh McDowell, all these different people are doing studies right now. They're saying there is a 300% better chance that a kid will stay in the church when they graduate from high school if they've had some kind of parental input. So you can be helping them in many ways. Okay? So you inform the parents regularly. What's expected? I want parents to know what's a non-negotiable and what's not. And here's what you tell your parents, and I love this. It's taken out of purpose-driven youth ministry. 5 things parents can expect from adult leadership. This is what they should be able to expect from you, and I would suggest you just copy this. We will model Christian leadership to your kids. We will mentor them in their leadership development. We will monitor their growth as student leaders. We will motivate them through the encouragement and feedback way of doing it, and we will encourage them to multiply their effectiveness by sharing their skills with others. That is, as a parent, I'm going to be more motivated to help my kids, be involved in student leadership if I know that that's what's going to happen. And then the other one would be, another tip 4 is meet occasionally. Don't meet every week. Don't burn kids out. You'll burn out. They'll burn out. Meet occasionally. I don't think a meeting should happen every week. Actually, I think it's too much. If a student leader is already involved in the ministry, they're probably already involved in participating in a small group, they're already involved in mission, and again, they should have a job description. In our student leadership, they had to go on a mission trip. They had to be involved in a small group. They had to be people who were going to stand there and greet others. They had to be already enough involved, so I don't think you do it all the time. But I think you do have programs with them. Maybe let's say it's once a month, and in that program, I think you have fun. I love, again, what one of Doug's friends and my friends say is they need to have a sweet tooth for Jesus, and you do that sometimes by fun. So just because it's leadership, don't get all intense and whatever. Sometimes have great fun in that meeting. Okay, laugh hard, like Doug was talking about earlier. I think it needs to be in a more intimate environment than in a room like this. And it's not you standing up and teaching or something, but in an intimate environment. Maybe you bring them into a home. Maybe you bring them into your home and you don't have a lot of other groups come into your home, but you do with the student leadership group. There has to be deeper teaching. Doug may not remember this, but when he was in high school, there were 3 guys who would come to my house on Thursday nights, and we actually went through the book of Romans. And that wouldn't be the natural thing that I was going to do with our whole group, but we actually studied the book of Romans. We kind of went verse by verse through the book of Romans. Well, you do that because it was more of a leadership type of a meeting. Okay? And you give them a challenge. You give them a leadership challenge. You help them do program solving where maybe you say, here's a problem we're having in the youth group. What would you do? Because people create what they support, and this would be good student leadership. You have them report ministry experiences. So again, everybody won't talk, but somebody may say, Guy, I really had a great conversation with so-and-so, or this is how this changed my life, or whatever it may be, but you do ministry reporting, and then you have an extended time of prayer. This is the time where they need to see that, this is not about them. It's not about you as a youth worker. It's about God. So I would really encourage you, if you're going to have a student leadership group, to really have a time where you take some extended prayer. I know one group that what they have is they have a copy. Every student leader has a copy of every kid's name who's come through the youth group. And then their job is not only to pray for them in their meeting, but then they take that with them, and their job is to pray like for 5 kids a night. What a cool thing. And all of a sudden you're praying for somebody, and you say, what, Ben, I was praying for you. You were? Yeah, our student leaders were praying for everybody, and I just prayed for you. Or they say, Ben, do you have any prayer requests? All of a sudden it changes them, and it's teaching them to be really faithful in their pastoral role. And the last tip is to reward them faithfully. And some may disagree with that, and that's absolutely fine. I believe this strongly. I think it's kind of what it's all about. I think this is a highlight. I think you reward them. And what that means is if they're student leaders, you spend more time with them than if they're not. I think you take them with you. Some of the best experiences I've ever had with students is when I have them in the car and we go someplace. Doug and I, when he was in high school, we went to camp together. He watched me get a ticket once because he was the only guy in the car when I got this ticket. We did things together, and it was because he was a student leader. Okay. Send them leadership-only emails. Let them see that they are, make them deep and make it challenging. Brag on them in front of the church. If you're ever in front of the church, you make an announcement, have the student leader stand up. I think, by the way, church participation should be a part of the leadership role, that they should be at church because, again, what you're doing is you can't separate church and youth group. And so if they're a student leader, then they need to be involved in the worship side to your church, what our church calls big church. And then I think you invite them occasionally to adult leadership type meetings. So they get, these are people who are going to, young people who are going to be a part of leadership in the church for the long haul as well. So let them get to know what the adults do. Now some truths to remember are in your notebook. Developing student leaders is not an event. Okay? It's not a summer program. None of those books, and look at all those books, that absolutely is mind-boggling, all those books. None of those books are student leadership books that if they go through that, now they're student leaders. Okay? Because it's not about a short-term program. Students watch student leaders as much as adult leaders. Regular students watch student leaders as much as adult leaders. In fact, student leadership is peer pressure at its best. Be prepared, because some of the most unlikely students will surprise you. Don't have a preconceived idea of what a good student leader is. Actually, some of the stars won't shine. Often, those are ones with the best resumes kind of fall short. Okay? I've been doing this for a long time. And I'll tell you, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where, I don't know what your situation is. I don't know if you have a big group or a small group, but invest in leadership kids. Again, what are you doing? You're moving kids from being attenders to being ministers to actually having a lifelong ministry. The bottom line in youth ministry is not where will they be right now. The bottom line in youth ministry is not where they are right now, how many kids you have right now, but where will they be 5 to 10 years from now. Okay? I hope this section of it affirms you, because I have a feeling a lot of you are doing that. But again, I think we just need to get that message in our own hearts, and we need to apply it, and then we need to let that word out to other people as well.